beneath the dark shroud of a stormy April sky in 1945, as the world tilted on the edge of a final reckoning, the IJN Yamato, the largest battleship ever built, slipped silently from the harbor at Tokuyama on her final voyage. She was a mountain of iron and fire, a symbol of fading imperial glory, armed with the largest naval guns ever mounted on a warship. Yet her mission was not one of conquest. It was death, preordained, final, a one-way journey into the abyss. This wasn't a strategic maneuver, but a ceremonial march into history, a final cry from a nation facing its twilight. Over 3,000 men stood aboard her vast steel decks, each one acutely aware of their fate. Some clutched photographs, wives, children, parents. Some carried lucky charms. Many wrote letters they would never mail. Some stared stoically into the sea and others prayed. But beneath the bravado, behind the uniforms, beat hearts filled with dread and honor. They knew they were sailing to die, not because they wanted to, but because they had to. Because honor in those days still meant something worth dying for. The operation was called Tengo, a last-ditch attempt to reach Okinawa, a place already under American assault. The Yamato, escorted by 8 other ships, had barely enough fuel for a one-way trip. There would be no refueling, no retreat, no coming home. The goal was to beach the Yamato on the shores of Okinawa, turn her into a fortress, and let her guns rain hell on the enemy. But the American fleet knew she was coming. Their reconnaissance planes saw everything. The United States responded with a massive aerial onslaught. Hundreds of aircraft from carriers stationed in the Pacific were sent to intercept and destroy the behemoth before she ever reached land. And so, as the sun barely pushed through the clouds that day, the horizon filled with specks, tiny at first, then monstrous squadrons of Hellcats, Helldivers, and Avengers roared through the sky like a hurricane of steel and smoke. The Yamato's lookout sounded the alarm. Every man moved into position. The time had come. As the first wave of aircraft screamed down from the heavens, the Yamato's mighty anti-aircraft guns opened fire. The sea became a thunderstorm of tracer rounds, smoke, and shrapnel. The roar of 18.1-inch guns echoed across the waves as if the ship herself were crying out in fury and despair. Flames and debris filled the air. The enemy was relentless, coordinated, overwhelming. Wave after wave of American planes rained, torpedoes and bombs onto the Yamato and her escorts. Some missed, many did not. One torpedo struck her port side near the engine room, then another and another. Inside the hull, steel twisted like cloth. Bulkheads caved and men were crushed. Still, the crew fought on. Fires raged. Sailors drowned below decks. Blood and oil mixed across corridors lit by flickering red lights. Orders were shouted above the din, but in many places there was only silence and smoke and screaming. The escorts began to fall, destroyers, like Asashimo and Kasumi, disappeared into flames and water. Yet Yamato pressed on. The pain did not stop. The bombs kept falling. The torpedoes kept striking. The sea had turned against her. The ship began to list heavily to port. Men scrambled to correct the ballast, pumping water from one side to another in a desperate attempt to keep her afloat. But the weight of the onslaught was too much. The great ship was bleeding to death, and still her guns fired. Still her officers gave commands. Still her spirit refused to break. There were reports from pilots above that the ship was glowing, as though lit from within, an iron beast consumed by its own fire, refusing to fall. At 2:20 p.m., a final torpedo struck amidships. The blast ripped through the ammunition magazines. Then came silence, a rumble. And then Yamato exploded. The detonation was so massive it was heard 200 kilometers away. A column of smoke and fire rose over 6 kilometers into the sky. Witnesses said the sea itself recoiled from the blast. When the smoke cleared, the Yamato was gone. No wreckage floated, only oil and bodies. Of the 3,332 men aboard, only 276 survived. The others went down with their ship, entombed in steel, salt, and history. They had not saved Okinawa. They had not turned the tide of war, but they had fulfilled their duty with unwavering resolve. The world moved on. Japan would surrender just months later, and peace, whatever that meant, would return. But beneath the quiet waves of the East China Sea, Yamato sleeps still. Her bones rest on the seabed, untouched by time but honored by memory. In Kure, school children visit the museum dedicated to her. They walk beneath the shadow of her 110 replica and ask their grandparents, why did she sail if she knew she would die? And the elders answer not with strategy, not with politics, but with quiet tears. Because she was Yamato, and that's what Yamato was built to do. The ship's name itself, Yamato, once meant more than a vessel. It meant Japan, its spirit, its culture, its sacrifice. And though the war ended long ago, that spirit lingers in stories told, in monuments built, in the dreams of a nation that rose from ashes. Some say she was a symbol of futility, others of blind nationalism. But for those who sailed on her deck, who manned her guns, who died in her bowels surrounded by fire and steel, Yamato was a home, a brotherhood, a grave marked not by stone but by waves and whispers. She was the last breath of a proud warrior dying on his feet. And sometimes that alone is worth remembering, because though the sea took her hull, the world still hears her echo. Yamato did not fall quietly. She thundered into eternity,